And what's your pleasure?
From the Thomaston Place Auction Galleries in Thomaston, Maine, I'm Elizabeth McLeod with Auction Waves.
32,500, 100,000 there. Players all over the house, 400,000 on this rare piece, and 600,000, 900,000, 1 million, 1,175 once, 100 million, 175 twice. We all good? Sold.
From their roots in 10th century China down to the present day, human history has been intertwined with the evolution and development of firearms. The collecting and study of historic guns is almost as old as the weapons themselves, and that history can take you down some surprising trails. Who would have imagined, for example, that one of the most advanced rifles of the American Civil War was invented by a dentist from Thomaston, Maine? In this edition of Auction Waves, we'll learn about that rifle and the man behind it, along with many other rare and interesting firearms on the block in our upcoming Summer Splendor auction. But first, the latest auction news. Preview time is a busy time here at Thomaston Place Auction Galleries as our crew puts the final touches on nearly 1,500 exciting lots, from fine art to vintage furnishings, from historic automobiles to rare recordings and music memorabilia to some interesting surprises. You can view these items in person at the Main Gallery Building, 51 Atlantic Highway in Thomaston, June 14th through June 26th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., where our expert staff will answer your questions about the items on the block and about auction procedure, and will personally guide you through the easy bidder registration process. And if you can't make it to the auction in person, telephone bidding gives you an effective, real-time alternative. Kaylor Bergman of our marketing department helps facilitate that process.
So what we do is somebody says that they're interested in a bid, and we'll set them up for a phone bid. I'll go into the back. We'll get assigned, each phone bidder will get assigned a person to call. We all get a phone. About 5 lots before yours of interest comes, we'll give you a call, and if we don't get you the first time, we will keep trying you until Kaja sells that piece. We will keep going and going and going.
And you can get started as a phone or absentee bidder by completing our registration form, available on request at the contact page of thomastonauction.com. And while you're there, be sure to check out the full online catalog for our 3-day Summer Splendor auction coming up fast, June 27th, 28th, and 29th. This is Auction Waves, and I'm Elizabeth McLeod. Wherever your collecting passion lies, another thing you're bound to collect is a deep body of specialized knowledge about the items in your collection. At Thomaston Place Auction Galleries, we're lucky to have on our staff many people with unique knowledge about the many facets of the collecting world. Joining us today for a close-up look at some of the most interesting historic rifles, pistols, and revolvers in our upcoming Summer Splendor auction is our staff firearms specialist, Zeb Casperson. We're going to talk about Zeb's personal picks as the most interesting and unusual firearms on the block this time around. And we'll begin, Zeb, with a rifle that had a definite role in the legend of the Wild West. A .44 caliber Henry repeating rifle in absolutely beautiful condition. Now, this is a gun of great historical significance, wouldn't you say?
Yes. No, I think I would say that's putting it lightly, because this is a rifle that in its form and in its history and its design is still very much with us today. It was born out of the early designs of a man named Walter Hunt, who was originally known for developing what were known as the volcanic pistols and rifles. There were a number of things that he was patenting with those designs, not just the firearms themselves, their mechanisms, but also a cartridge that he called the rocket ball. Ultimately, his initial efforts were supported by initial investments from Horace Smith, Dan Wesson, and Oliver Winchester, which should all be relatively familiar names because, while the Volcanic Arms Company itself, as it initially existed, pretty much went defunct immediately within a year, you would have two very iconic companies in U.S. history come out of it, Smith & Wesson and Winchester Repeating Arms. And it was Winchester who was the one that took specifically the design for the volcanic rifle and wanted that to be iterated on and improved. It was given to a man named Benjamin Tyler Henry. He was tasked with this, of taking Walter Hunt's designs and turning them into something that would be more feasible. I mean, because, for all the advances he made with his initial design, the biggest issue with them was really his rocket ball cartridge. It was very anemic, very underpowered. And, for the advantages it brought, it wasn't really worth it. So essentially, I mean, to put it very simply, what Benjamin Tyler Henry did was take Walter Hunt's mechanism and just adapt it for a cartridge rather than a sort of this odd rocket ball caseless piece. And, from there, I think really the rest is kind of history. You see elements of that design continue on, in Winchester's history, especially just straight into the Winchester 1894 lever actions, which were designed by John Browning, but still have a lot of elements that are shared with that original Henry rifle.
Now, how many rounds will this hold?
The Henry rifle, I believe it was 14 rounds, but it was just something that it was far and above what most other rifles were offering at that time. I mean, another one that I can think off the top of my head would have been the Spencer carbine, and if I'm remembering correctly, that only had a capacity of, I mean, still high for the period, but compared to the Henry, it was only about 7 rounds stored in the stock. But, it was something that offered a huge advantage compared to most line infantry of the time. And, there were the famous remark of it from a Confederate general was that it was that damned Yankee rifle you loaded on Sunday and could shoot all week.
Now, why didn't it become more widespread in the Civil War? I have seen that it was not entirely popular.
Well, I would say it wasn't entirely popular with the military brass. A lot of early repeating rifle designs were pushed back on from military leadership, mostly over concerns of logistics. There was a serious concern that they would not be able to keep up with, if regular infantry were given access to 10, 14 rounds to fire all at once. They felt that they would not be able to keep up with the demands of ammunition to keep the troops supplied. And so ultimately, while they could see the way that firepower was amplified, from a single soldier, they just felt that it would be a sort of Achilles heel of their own in itself, and that it would deplete their supplies and ultimately leave them exposed. When you see it, what the U.S. military actually bought, they bought somewhere around 1,700 rifles, official U.S. military contract. But ultimately, there were about 6,000 to 7,000 rifles overall that actually saw service in the war, most of those being privately purchased by soldiers themselves. So I think you can see that, well, the brass didn't really buy into it. The men who were in the field who were fighting saw the utility of the rifle, saw its potential. And with them, it was very popular. And I think that's kind of what allowed it really to cement itself in the popular culture, in the sort of cultural identity of America. That rifle being such an, sort of iconic shape and everything was because, in a practical sense, the men who were doing the work saw that. I guess the proof was in the pudding, I guess, is a simple way of putting it.
How did this gun end up as the lore of the Wild West? I mean, if it was largely a military gun, did it find its way into civilian hands after the war in large numbers?
Yes. I mean, a lot of weapons that saw service in the Civil War ended up being surplused into the civilian market. The war itself created a huge demand for arms and ammunition that was not totally expended, by the time the conflict was resolved. And so you had this sort of glut of arms, ammunition, swords, uniforms that really just made itself out into the civilian populace. And, and it saw a lot of use. I mean, in the expansion West, there was a lot of utility in this equipment, in this firearm that was built for rough military use, there was a sort of understanding that it would be robust, that it would be suited for the harsh environments, people were finding themselves in as they went out west.
Now, as I look at this rifle, I am struck by the fact that it wears its age extremely well. It looks like it just came out of a crate. Is it common to find one so well kept?
I don't know that I would say common. I mean, I think these were rifles, again, like I said, that were respected and admired by the people who used them. And that, I think, translates into a tendency for them to be well taken care of. I mean, this rifle, I think, this specific rifle that we have, it is remarkable that it's in the shape it's in because it was found in the corner of a basement stacked up with a bunch of other rifles that were far worse for wear than it was. Yeah, no, I mean, I would say it's something that's getting rarer and rarer. Not only just the, travails or the wear of time itself is that, people ultimately always like to adjust things to suit their own needs. And so it's hard to find a rifle that's as close to its original condition as this one is. I think more than just that it's in good condition. And even still, it has to be noted that the rear sight, which would have originally been a ladder sight, like we have on the Evans rifle, has been replaced with a sort of buckhorn sight.
Well, to have survived 150 years and look that good is really nothing short of remarkable. To talk about guns that went into the surplus market, our next item is a World War II era Smith & Wesson Victory Model 38 Special revolver.
Yes.
These were very popular in the surplus outlets after World War II. Now, I own a Smith & Wesson 38 Special Model 1902 military and police civilian gun, which was, the generic cop gun of the pre-war era. Is this more or less the same gun as that?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, the design of the frame, the barrel, the mechanism is more or less all going to be the same as the civilian guns. I mean, the biggest considerations for them putting this into military production, for one, is going to be the finish, whereas a lot of civilian guns are going to be a really nice, glossy, blued finish, high blue. The guns that Smith & Wesson were trying to make for the military, for the U.S. Army, were largely Parkerized or dull blued. They were not worried about making them look totally attractive. They were worried about giving them a robust finish that would resist the elements. And I mean, even more than that, I think you can probably look at this revolver and see a lot of the machining marks that are still present as probably compared to the civilian model you have. There was not as much finishing work done on these guns because it wasn't really important to their function, and it ultimately saved the military money in purchasing them.
Now, in looking at this gun, I can see very little wear. The cylinders don't look scratched at all. There's hardly any wear in the bore. Mm-hmm. This probably didn't get a lot of use. No,
and I think there are quite a few of these that likely never actually got issued. This one we don't have any documentation for. I mean, it could have very well been issued because, again, a lot of them were issued domestically. They weren't given even to like rear echelon troops or MPs or stuff like that. These were given to truck drivers for manufacturing firms in the United States.
Guards and defense plants.
Guards and defense plants, things like that. I mean, it was something where, obviously they wanted to give them a practical firearm, a firearm that could fulfill the needs they needed, but they didn't really need anything special. I mean, there was probably some concern about espionage or sabotage, but for the U.S., it was not something that was as much of a concern as it would have been in Europe. So, something to give people, I think more than anything, it's something that kind of gives security or those drivers confidence more than anything.
And the large number of those that were manufactured, weren't they still being issued well into the late 20th century?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a long history pretty much all militaries of kind of putting equipment through as much use as it can possibly sustain. So, especially as you go through the 20th century and manufacturing of these items becomes more and more expensive, the U.S. military definitely tries to stretch things out as much as they possibly can. I mean, unsubstantiated, but, I've heard reports from guys I've known who are currently serving that they're still being issued magazines that were manufactured during Vietnam. It's something that we're never really going to escape from. So yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of these pistols continued to see use throughout the 20th century and, in limited roles, but still wherever somebody just needed a gun, this was an option.
But you could easily take that out to a range today and shoot it and enjoy it. It's still a good solid weapon.
Yes. Oh, no, certainly. I mean, what Smith & Wesson, what Colt was making especially back then, were very robust, really kind of tanky guns. Even just looking at that one on the table, I would have no concern just as long as you're not putting atomic hand loads through it.
You wouldn't want to shoot a high pressure cartridge.
Yeah. This thing is not rated for plus P, so please don't shoot it through it.
Right. And
if you have to.
You could say the same thing about the 38 Special Colt Commando that we're offering as well, which is basically Colt's version of the same gun. Although Commando does give it a certain panache. Were those actually issued to Commandos?
As far as I can understand it, no. That is, I think, that was a name that was given for marketing reasons more than anything else. It kind of reminded me, thinking back, that the inventor of the Thompson submachine gun originally wanted it to be called the Annihilator, if I'm remembering correctly. So Colt calling that revolver the Commando, I think, is more in line with that. It was not something they were specifically creating for the purpose of sabotage units, special forces. It was something they were still creating to fill the same niche as the Smith & Wesson Victory. They just, I think, felt calling it the Commando gave them a edge marketing wise.
But if an air raid warden needed a gun, that would be the sort of thing that he would get, something like that.
Well, and to say specifically, we don't have documentation for the Victory. We do have documentation for the Commando that it was part of a shipment of 100 guns that were given to the Remington Rand Company in New Johnson City in New York for their propeller division. So again, like we were discussing earlier, almost certainly this was either given to a driver or security personnel or a factory guard for the purpose of protecting manufacturing at home.
And it's still a fully functional weapon today.
Oh, yeah.
And we have another interesting Colt, model 1903 38 semi-automatic, and it looks like the little brother of an M1911. Would that be more or less accurate?
More or less. I mean, if anything, it's probably more like its grandfather. I mean, this is part of an iterative design of John Browning working up towards the 1911, where you can see a lot of the form, the aesthetic form between the two pistols. But when you actually look at their mechanism, there's a lot of difference. They both are working on a short recoil system. But what John Browning was able to come up with for the 1911 is design that is really kind of timeless and is still with us today. Well, it's not exactly as it was seen in that pistol, the 1911. You have many modern pistols that operate under the same concept as what the 1911 was working on. So it really is just kind of more or less a stepping stone to get to what really is kind of the bedrock foundation of modern pistols.
And it's a chance to own and perhaps shoot a weapon that is a direct ancestor of the ones that we would be more familiar with today. And speaking of more familiar with today, we have from the Herb Belkin collection, a Heckler & Koch P7, complete with all of the paperwork. And it dry fires nicely. This is a modern German gun. What is unique about it?
So I pulled this one out specifically. So what we have here, this specific gun is one that was intended for the U.S. consumer market. This would have been one that would have been issued to the German police, but this was born out of the Munich Olympic massacre. Prior to that, my understanding was that German police forces were very decentralized. Regions of Germany, their police forces had a lot of autonomy in how they were allowed to operate, what they armed themselves with, what their uniforms were. But that massacre at the Olympics really put things in perspective for the German government, and they decided that they really needed to standardize police forces across the country. And one of those things that they wanted to do was to standardize on a pistol design. So the Heckler & Koch P7, Heckler & Koch, I should say, P7 was H&K's bid for that service pistol. If I remember right, it was adopted, though there were later iterations. This is sort of the first design of the pistol, and its sort of biggest shortfall is that it uses a single stack magazine. It can only hold 8 rounds of 9mm parabellum. I believe the later iteration of this was the PM73, if I'm remembering correctly, with its biggest difference being that it moved to a double magazine, which I believe held 15 rounds. It's kind of a unique gun in a lot of ways, and its most sort of distinctive feature is the front strap of the grip here is actually the grip safety of the gun itself, and it actually serves to cock the gun. You can't fire it without depressing that. But beyond that, it also serves as the slide release for the gun, allowing it to be sent home after it's locked open. I mean, it's a very sleek design. It's relatively thin for what it is. I mean, something that's easy to carry on you. but I can certainly see why it's not still in use today. There's some issues of its ergonomics. It is kind of difficult to maintain that grip and practice good shooting technique with this, but they're highly desirable nowadays. I mean, they are still really beautifully built guns, really well made. From what I understand, I haven't gotten a chance to shoot one, but I understand that they're relatively reliable. And I mean, more interesting than anything, that we have the paperwork with this one. We also have quite a few magazines that come with it, which, from what I can see, are rather expensive on their own. So, I mean, I think this is a really good opportunity for collectors of modern firearms. This is like a unique offering for us, and it also comes with a lot of equipment that's hard to find yourself.
And it also comes with the pedigree of having been owned by Herb Belkin, the prominent record industry executive, art connoisseur, and all-around interesting personality. So that's something to be considered as you bid. A German military rifle we also have, a Mauser Gewehr 7184 bolt-action repeater.
Yes.
Now, how far back does this rifle date?
So this is an iteration of the original Mauser Gewehr 1871, which was Paul Mauser's first design that was adopted by the German military. It was a single-shot bolt-action cartridge-based firearm. So it was shooting a brass cartridge. I believe it was 11 by 60 millimeter, and it saw quite a bit of use, but there became, a desire for there to be more capacity. So it was a single-shot rifle. The German military was seeing that magazine-fed rifles were going to quickly become the norm, and so they wanted something that fit that niche. And so they went back to Paul Mauser, and he created, it's not a conversion, I think, as some people might believe. They weren't taking 1871s and converting them into 71/84s. They were building these from the ground up, with the basis being the 71. So it is an interesting design in that instead of what we're kind of used to now with internal box-fed magazines, this actually uses a tube that follows along the barrel all the way down and holds a total of 8 rounds when fully loaded, and operates off this kind of interesting cartridge elevator in the back that's sort of the spoon shape that pivots. I picked this one out just because it's an interesting sort of transitionary firearm. This is showing, modern Western powers are starting to recognize the way that warfare is changing, the new demands of modern combat. And so they're finally starting to, make the changes they probably should have been making decades ago. But this one's also interesting because, while it was in its own right a pretty big step forward for military small arms, it was made almost immediately obsolete by the French introducing the Lebel rifle and its smokeless cartridge in 1887. So these didn't see a lot of use. They got surplused out pretty fast. I believe actually quite a few of them ended up in Japan. Yeah, these were something where, very interesting design, very modern, but just, again, with the way technology was changing, the pace at which it was changing, it was made into something that was nearly useless almost immediately. But this one is, again, I mean, it does have some unfortunate surface rust, but overall is really in beautiful shape. The rifling is in great condition. The internals are spotless. And as far as I can tell, every single serial number matches on here. And by the way, when I say every serial number, I include every single screw and bolt in this gun. They've printed it on everything.
So that is a 100% original specimen of that rifle.
Yes.
And it doesn't look like it saw a lot of use.
Honestly, this thing probably sat in a crate for close to a century and then somebody bought it. I really wouldn't be surprised.
Well, we probably couldn't say this about this 19th century Ottoman Empire blunderbuss pistol. Now, this looks like they took a regular blunderbuss like you would see in, historical fiction or pirate movie, something like that. It looks like they took that and shrunk it by 2/3.
Oh, yeah, no, at least. I mean, and that was the interesting thing, because I wasn't too familiar with these before this one popped up, and my immediate assumption was, well, it looks like a child's gun. But doing the research into it, these were actually designed as pistols in the Ottoman Empire. And in a lot of ways, well, this one does look like it was used quite a bit. The bore is rather dark and pitted. They were really more a status object. This was something that signaled to people your wealth or your standing in society in a lot of the same ways that swords was. I mean, I feel like that's a pretty common theme in the Middle East, and that historically weaponry, and in a lot of cultures, not just the Middle East, but just thinking about them specifically, there's a lot of tie-in with public display of weaponry as a way of signaling to people what your status is within that society.
So someone perhaps of rather high station, a nobleman or some sort of high official would have carried a weapon like this more as an exhibition of his symbol of authority,
Yes,
and as something to actually use in a situation.
in a situation of self-defense. And I mean, again, it could have very well been done that way, but looking at that piece, I would assume it was probably more often than not shot in celebration.
Something to make a loud noise.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it does appear that it would make a very loud noise if you were to load it up and shoot it.
Yeah. No, certainly.
Well, we have a real historical gem next here. We have a 44 caliber Evans repeating rifle. Now, I didn't know about these rifles until you told me about them, and I was reading up on it yesterday, and I just find the whole story completely fascinating. How can you have a rifle in the 1870s that will hold more than 30 rounds, and how is it invented by a dentist from Thomaston, Maine?
Yeah, no, I mean, just as you said, so, these rifles, this was a design by a man by the name of Warren R. Evans, who was a dentist locally here in Thomaston, and him and his brother, George, built these in Mechanics Falls, Maine, and I mean, they are, in a lot of ways, really forward-thinking guns. I mean, it's something that, like you said, like, how do you have this capacity, back then? And it's from some really outside-the-box thinking, I think. So the way that this gun achieves its capacity, so let me back up here. The guns for that period, like I was saying, the Henry, I believe, was 14 rounds, and I may be totally off on that, but it was above 10. The Evans rifles, the very first models were able to hold 28 rounds in their magazine, and the later versions of them from the transition model on were able to hold 34. And they achieve this by means of an Archimedean screw that goes all the way up the buttstock. If you look at the rifle, you can see it, where the buttstock is sort of cut in half with this big round sheet metal tube running up it all the way to the barrel.
And there are some exploded views of this mechanism online that are absolutely fascinating to look at, to see that they could make something like this and that it would work.
Yes. No, well, I mean, it's because I think you and I were discussing this the other day, and that there are, you see in firearms development, there are times where a gun will show a great amount of promise in its prototype stage, where it works properly, it does everything it should. And once you move over to the issue of mass manufacturing them, problems can start arising. But what's kind of amazing about this is that, well, there were certainly iterations to design over the 15,000 that were made over about 6 years. They seem to work as they should, and it is something, like you said, when you look at that mechanism and thinking about the time it was made, it's very intricate. It's somewhat complicated. It has a lot of moving parts that are interfacing with each other. And there were ways in which the guns could destroy themselves. I mean, to be totally clear, but there were still 15,000 of them made. I mean, that's
all of those parts had to be hand machined.
Yes. I mean, that, and obviously they're not interchangeable between each other like they are, parts are nowadays in firearms. But still, I mean, this was the only firearm in the 19th century that was mass produced in the state of Maine. They a great amount of demand, especially out west, even after the war. I don't know that many of these would have seen combat in the Civil War, but they do seem to have seen rather extensive use in the Indian Wars out west, the Plain Indians, on both sides. I mean, both the Indians getting their hands on them, as well as some of the settlers and the military moving out into that area. Don't seem to be too many of them still sticking around here. A lot of the other examples that I can see going up for sale at other antique houses are mostly out west, where it seems a lot of these rifles have ended up.
Now, they developed a special proprietary cartridge for this gun, which probably was necessary because of the strange feeder mechanism. There's no chance that you're going to be able to find those cartridges today.
Perhaps some historical examples, but in terms of modern production, I'm not aware of any companies that are making them. There may be something I'm unaware of out there, another cartridge that you could cut down or reformed, but even at the time, there was a big issue of sourcing ammunition for these rifles. That is probably one of its biggest complaints that I can find from historical accounts of the rifle, was not really anything against it itself, but more that it was a very difficult gun to keep fed.
It seems like that was a bad business strategy. If they could have used a standard cartridge for that, it would have been a much more popular weapon.
Yes, and and I'm not so sure that really it's the design itself that necessitated a proprietary cartridge, because when you look at there were actually two cartridges over the rifle's lifespan that were made for it. I mean, they were both more or less the same. There was 44 Evans Short, which was the initial cartridge. It was later known as Short, and then 44 Evans Long, which came later, interestingly enough, when the rifle gained more in capacity. So, yeah, I mean, even for that period, Winchester was probably the only manufacturer at the time that was producing these rounds. And if I remember right, they ceased production in 1902.
So,
but it's still to say that, for about 20 years after these rifles ceased production, there was still a demand for the ammunition. It was still being produced, which again, I think kind of speaks to the staying power of the design and the affinity that some people really felt for these rifles.
And it's a wonderful intersection of gun collecting, Americana, and Maine memorabilia.
Yes.
You probably won't find another one of these rifles coming up anytime soon, so this is your chance to get one, and a very nice example of it.
I can't share too much information, but the gentleman who consigned this rifle took extremely good care of it. He has quite a few firearms in this auction that were all really in immaculate shape. So I'm very grateful to him for consigning these items. I think some really important pieces of history that he has been a very excellent steward of up until now.
We look forward to passing them on to a new generation.
Yes.
And the final gun that we'll discuss is, there must be a story to this. We have what looks like it started out as just an ordinary M1 rifle that any World War II veteran would recognize, any Korean or Vietnam War veteran would recognize. But what did they do to it?
So the M1 carbine was introduced in World War II. It saw service through the Vietnam War. After those conflicts, as those rifles started to make it into the civilian market, into the surplus market, they proved to be extremely popular. I think if you think about AR-15s today, in a lot of ways, the M1 carbine filled that similar sort of role. It was something that people took and made into what they wanted it to be. So, that's what we have here is that, I could create all sorts of fanciful stories. Oh, it's, somebody made it to be the ultimate sniper or something like that. The reality is somebody took it, didn't want to pay for a good deer rifle, and decided to try and turn this into a good deer rifle.
And yet that in itself is a story.
Yes.
You had this military weapon made in enormous quantities during World War II. Going into the surplus market, somebody picks it up for $12.95 or whatever.
Yeah.
And they soup it up and change it and customize it into this unique, one-of-a-kind specimen. And this is a chance to perhaps experience that if you were born too late to go into a store and buy it yourself.
That is true. Yeah. I don't think it'll sell for $12.95, but it'll definitely sell for a lot cheaper than most M1 carbines do.
So if you were bidding for your own collection, and perhaps you will be, I don't know, what is your pick in this auction?
I think an obvious pick would be the Evans rifle. I really have to say this is a unique piece to really actually have my hands on. I've never seen one in person before. I believe I may have seen one at a distance in a museum a long time ago. So it's a fleetingly rare opportunity for me to have my hands on there. But I get a little skittish about owning very valuable guns. I like to use guns when I buy them, and this is one that really deserves to be well cared for, and probably better care than I could give it. I actually think, were I to pick any of these that I'd be interested in bidding on, it would be the German Gewehr, the 7184. I really just like the look of it, and I find the mechanism extremely satisfying to operate. The ammunition would be very difficult to source, but from what I can find, not totally impossible. It's a nice piece. It's an interesting design, and it represents to me a very interesting part of firearms development of, when we're getting out of the old age and really starting to move into the modern age of firearms design.
I think that's a very good way to describe that. It does look like the end of the 19th century and the start of the 20th century, just coming together in one specimen. Well, thank you, Zeb, for joining us today on Auction Waves, and we hope that everyone who will be bidding in this auction will be happy with their purchases, will enjoy exhibiting them, perhaps enjoy shooting them, and will enjoy the entire experience, as we have enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you very much, and happy for the opportunity.
History is often something that you can hold in your hands. And that's a big part of what we do here at the galleries, and the joy our entire staff takes in the preservation and perpetuation of fine antique and vintage items is something you'll feel whenever you take part in one of our auctions. Oh, my ride's firing a salute this time, which reminds you to come and meet us at the galleries during our auction previews, June 14th through June 26th, leading up to our 3-day Summer Splendor auction, June 27th, 28th, and 29th. You can view the items discussed in today's program along with rarities from the worlds of music and art from the estate of famed recording producer Herb Belkin, and you can explore a whole world of fine art and decor from the private collection of television and radio legend Sally Jesse Raphael. There's a whole lot more, so whatever your collection passion, you'll find it when you review our full catalog at thomastonauction.com. At the piano, Tishri Dobson. On the guitar, Dave Allen. And the entire program is produced, written, and edited for you by yours truly, Elizabeth McLeod, who wishes you smooth sailing and happy bidding for Auction Waves. Auction Waves is an exclusive presentation of Thomaston Place Auction Galleries in Thomaston, Maine.